The Shophetim series. Covenant. In the sixth and final book of the series, Book 6, Colin must find and help his cousin Eliza harness her newfound powers of a judge. Meanwhile, they must face Conway and his consort, the fallen angel Asherah. Conway has signed a bill outlawing judges and has shut down the Black Files division, calling them terrorists and gaining favors in order to be elected president. Conway is promised status in the rank of Antichrist by Lucifer in return for his services, and help tie the world government to America in its final stages. Colin, Eliza, and Michael must ask for the aid of Connor and other known outlaws in order to stop Conway and his army. Will they be able to stop Conway in time before he runs rampant across the U.S.? Or will Conway and Asherah destroy not only the judges' lives, but the people affiliated with them? The storylines of the heroes of this series come to conclusions in the final book of the series. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. Judges, -218. KJV. Chapter 1. Conway exited the nightclub, stumbling into the silence of the night. The alleyway was low lit with a street light a few yards away where bugs buzzed. The congressman let it over and relieved himself on the brick wall of the establishment. The noise and long line in the bathroom caused him to exit the building. His consort, Asherah, was throwing him a birthday party. It was a pause and a break away from the campaign trail, but Conway wasn't a fan. He didn't like clubs or loud music venues. Partying was not his thing. Conway liked doing quieter things like golf or attending a ballet. Yes, ballet. Conway sighed deeply as his thoughts settled on Callie and how he missed her. If she wouldn't have been with his dealer and tried to blackmail him, they might have had a chance. He knew the Russian Nat and he would never have worked out. Nat was a beautiful girl, but there was no chemistry between the two. Now he was stuck with this devil Asherah. Conway dug in his pocket and retrieved a pack of cigarettes. He lit one up and inhaled a huge lungful of smoke, before slowly breathing it back out his nostrils. Thunder rolled overhead and Conway glanced up at the sky. So much time has passed and so many tragedies have led up to this moment. Conway practically gave up his family to be in this power position. Nothing mattered but his goal to gain as much power as possible. He didn't care who was in his way or what he had to sacrifice to get it. He could blame his father or his upbringing for being the cause of the way he turned out, but it was only a part of the reasoning for his madness. Most of his ambition came from himself and the few demons that resided unknown inside of him. Family rituals and curses never go unnoticed by the Dark Army. Of course, Conway had demons. Emotional, physical, mental, and literally demons possessing him, driving him to seek more and more. He embraced them and fed them often. The congressman turned to enter back through the door, but as soon as it was opened, a hand came from behind him and shut it. Conway spun around to see Brea and two other men standing behind her. His eyes blinked rapidly as if he saw a ghost. He had thought Brea was dead. Brea, happy birthday! Brea grins and throws a hard right hook. Her closed fist landed square in Conway's jaw. The force made Conway stumble backward and lean against the door. Brea grabbed him by the jacket and flung him to the ground. The congressman tumbled and landed on his back. He sat up, but only to be forced back to the ground by one of the men's large foot pressing on his chest. I have waited and trained for 2 years for this, Dustin. Let me. Brea pushed Dustin off Conway as she bent down to grab a hold of his tie. You thought you were safe, Conway. That after you destroyed me and my family that I was dead and gone. Well, I'm not. She punched him in the face hard. I am back and I am here to finish this. She went to punch him again, but Conway dodged and punched her in her side. Brea fell off him, and Conway scrambled to get off the ground. Dustin used his leg to try and kick Conway, but the congressman grabbed his leg and used his other hand to use a full-force punch into Dustin's face. Dustin was human, and the force from the demon possessed by Conway made him almost become unconscious. Conway tossed Dustin aside and held his fist up to fight with the other male. Conway could tell he was a hunter by the way he was dressed. Brea had joined them, no doubt. That was how she was able to find and attack him with such force. The hunter and Conway threw a few punches, but Conway made short work of him. He tossed the hunter towards the wall, banging the man's head into the bricks. Conway was about to finish him off before Brea came at him again. The woman was all fury and fire. Her punches and kicks were wild. Brea used her knowledge of karate against Conway. At first, the moves were allowing Brea to get hits in, but Conway had powers due to his possession. Once he picked up on her rhythm, he attacked. He didn't hold back just cause she was a woman. No, he gave her full force hits. At first, Brea held together, but after a couple of hits, the force and pain started to get to her. She stumbled back and hit the wall behind her. Dustin quickly jumped in to aid Brea. Dustin sideswiped Conway with a leg sweep, but Conway jumped over it. Dustin then threw more punches, but Conway blocked him. Conway was getting fed up with this fight. He reached out and uppercut Dustin as hard as he could. The knuckles made contact with Dustin's nose, breaking it. Dustin tried his best to absorb the blow and fight back, but Conway was too powerful. Conway grabbed a hold of Dustin's neck and broke it. Brea screamed in horror as Dustin fell to the ground dead. The other hunter finally was able to get to his feet, but before he could charge Conway, a sheriff appeared behind him. She used her claws to punch through his chest. She grabbed his heart and tore it out. The man fell dead on the concrete below. Brea's eyes widened at the sight of a sheriff. The devil woman wore a skimpy gold sequins dress that complemented her bronze skin. Her platform heels clanked against the concrete as she brought the heart to her mouth. She took a bite out of it as she glared at Brea. "Friends of yours, Conway." Ashera turned to face Conway. Her mouth was bloody from the heart still in her hands. "You can say that." Conway blew the blood out of his nose and ran a hand through his blonde hair, fixing it. "What shall we do with her?" the she-devil asked with a smirk. "I don't care." Conway huffed. "That is right, you don't care. You don't care how many lives you destroy just to get what you want." Brea cursed up at them. "Says the one who attacked the congressman behind a building. So noble." A sheriff scoffed. "Like how he ran down my parents in cold blood." "It was an accident," Conway mumbled ashamedly. "You were high and drunk. You killed them like you killed Alejandro and like you have Diana killed." "Shut up." Conway kicked at Brea. "No. You killed your own family for your gain. You are heartless. You are weak. In the end, you will die alone and with nothing." Conway reached down and grabbed Brea by the throat. As he choked her to death, Ashera looked on with a gleam in her eyes. She was proud of the way he was handling everything. The more depraved and damaging to his soul, the better. Brea struggled under the grip of Conway's hands. Her legs kicked as her nails dug into his forearms, scratching his jacket. Her wide eyes and wide mouth gasped for air to fill her lungs, but none did. She finally went limp as she passed into eternity. Conway finally came to and realized what he was doing. He quickly let go and watched her body slump over and fall to the ground. The congressman looked down at his hands and then at Ashera. The devil clapped in approval and glanced down at Brea's body. "Well done." "Shut up." "I didn't mean to." "Oh yes, you did. You acted on pure hate and rage. The darkness in you is growing. Lucifer was right about you. Stop it." Conway felt guilty for killing Brea, his cousin. It was a bit strange. He didn't often express or feel guilt, but for some reason, it washed over him. He felt dirty and horrible about it. Even though she attacked him, did he take things too far? Ash reached over and cupped his face. There. I will make it all better. Leave me alone. Conway brushed her off. What, don't you like this form? She asked before changing into her endem female. Or how about this? She changed into the form of Nat, his redeed ex-fiancé. I don't like redeeds. He growled. No. What about this? Ash turned into Callie and Conway snapped. Don't you ever take that form again. He pointed a finger in her face. She shifted back to her original state and shrugged. Fine, just stop acting like a baby. You are to be the next president and Antichrist. Quit moping. This is what you wanted. Come on, we need to get you on a flight out to California. She tried to calm his raging with a gentle touch on the shoulder. She was right. This is what he wanted. No turning back now. Conway fixed his suit and tie and walked with Ashera towards the front of the building, where the car sat and waited for them. Why do we need to go to California? He asked as he entered the car. For the ceremony. Also for you to show your face to the other human leaders. They need to know who the next face of the country will be. A sort of meet and greet. There will be a ceremony, a sacrifice, as well as a few other things I cannot say out loud. Ashera's eyes glowed at the thought of the evil that was going to take place. The fallen angels and devils feed off of the wicked depravity that went on in those woods. I see. Well, I suppose we should get this over with. Now, are you to be my wife? Or how does this whole thing work? I have been with you for about a week, and I am still unsure of who you are, less alone what you will be to me. Conway spoke bluntly. Ashera chuckled a bit. I am known by many names by many cultures. Aphrodite, Venus, Inanna, Isis. But my original name is Ashera, Queen of Heaven. Most worship me as a mother goddess, a life giver. She began to explain. Ashera is the consort of the Sumerian god Anu and the Ugaritic god El, both of whom are the oldest gods in their respective pantheons. In the Ugaritic pantheon, her role earned her a similar high position. Yahweh commands the destruction of her shrines in Deuteronomy 12, in order to keep his worship pure. The Israelite history also includes the Canaanite link of Asherah with sacred trees. One of Asherah's Canaanite epithets, goddess, for example, is etymologically identical to the Hebrew term for the terebinth tree. The Israelites erected these sacred poles or stylized trees associated with Asherah throughout most of their history, especially during the pre-monarchic, tribal period, Judges 6:25-26, 28:30, and during the divided monarchy, both in the northern kingdom of Israel and in the southern kingdom of Judah, according to the biblical record. These sacred poles could be found in a variety of locations. They were trees that were cut down and carved into the image of the goddess. According to Judges 6, an Asherah sacred pole stood opposite the altar of Baal, the Canaanite storm god. Unfortunately, our sources do not provide enough evidence to determine why the Israelites were drawn to Asherah worship. One theory is that the religion of Asherah was particularly appealing to the king's mother in royal circles, notably in Jerusalem's southern palace. The queen mother's position in the palace was often paralleled by Asherah's role as a mother goddess in the sky, and her status as the wife of the king's father shows an affinity with Asherah's cult. Jezebel entered Israel with hundreds of prophets for Baal and Asherah. Most Canaanite religion and Hebrew idolatry are sexual fertility cults. The Hebrew Bible, which repeatedly and graphically associates goddess cults with prostitution, supports this position. You lay down as a prostitute on every high hill and under every spreading tree, Jeremiah wrote, Jeremiah 2:20. Hosea, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, in particular, blame goddess cults for making Yahweh jealous, citing his jealousy as the reason for Jerusalem's destruction. Sexual rites usually centered around powerful and influential women, despite their nature being unknown. As a result, many people believe that Asherah worship included licentious ceremonies. While this may be due in part to Israelite priests and prophets' polemics against competing for religious factions, holy prostitution was also a well-established practice in ancient Mesopotamia. This was particularly associated with the goddess Ishtar, another name for Asherah. Do not set up any wooden Asherah beside the altar you build to the Lord your God, and do not erect a sacred stone, for these the Lord your God hates. Deuteronomy 16:21-22. Over and over God condemned this worship, but the stiff-necked people continued to disobey him. They repeatedly fell into this worship and service to the fallen god Baal and his consort Asherah. As it was in the Bible days, the same remains today. People continue to worship these fallen angels as gods, giving them rights over areas and power over land and humans. I am a fallen angel, a general in Lucifer's army. He assigned me to protect you as well as be your consort, a companion. I can be whatever you wish. Wife, girlfriend, mistress. Whatever you need. I can be your lover, but for most, I am your protector, she explained. Conway let a small smile show on his normally hard face. He rested his hand on her knee and leaned in. I think we can come to some sort of arrangement that can work for the both of us. Chapter 2. Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. The Bohemian Grove is a 2,700-acre virgin redwood grove in Northern California. It sits 75 miles north of San Francisco, and is where the rich, powerful, and their entourages camp out in cabins and tents during the last 2 weeks of July. It's a wealthy man's fraternity party in the woods, and an old men's Boy Scout camp, replete with an initiation process and an owl as a totem animal. The Bohemian Club was founded in 1872 in San Francisco. The Bohemians began traveling to their small hideaway soon after the club was created. It grew in popularity by the 1880s, and is still going strong now. It's a gathering spot for the powerful to unwind, enjoy one another's company, and meet some of the artists, entertainers, and professors who have been invited to provide a thin veneer of cultural and intellectual pretension to the occasion. It is a secret gathering spot to plot, plan, or conspire. The most significant decisions are not made in the boardrooms of corporations and foundations, nor at the White House, nor in the backrooms of Congress, as we might anticipate. They happen here, under the gaze of a large wooden statue of Moloch. Moloch resembles a winged bull, but the statue eroded to resemble an owl over time. Moloch is the principality of this region. This fallen angel grants the men of power blessings and favor with not only each other, but the other fallen angels and their master Lucifer. It is a location, a meeting place where the supernatural and humans can coincide and discuss the future of the country. The 2-hour flight was filled with Ash explaining to Conway who she was. They only paused briefly as they landed and exited the plane. The two quickly hopped in the SUV and headed to the grove. She then began to explain to Conway where they were headed and what to expect. When they arrived at their destination, Ash decided to go deeper into the explanation, telling Conway of their rise to power and the ultimate goal in mind. Lucy wants to release sin and the darkness all in the world, and he is working through us, the fallen angels and the humans, to bring it about, Ash explained. We corrupted humans and animals after the fall. When Adam was kicked out of the garden is when we started our work. Before God wiped the slate clean in the flood it was easier. Now we have a bit more trouble in doing so. Conway and Ash took a seat at one of the large tables. Others were taking their seats around them as Ash continued explaining to Conway her story. After the flood, when humans began multiplying again, the old ways were revisited at Babel. Nimrod was harnessing and inviting us fallen ones back into the world. That was the reason for the ziggurat pyramid he built to heaven. This caused God to confuse the languages and mankind split. But as the people stretched out across the world according to their languages, They brought all the knowledge with them they had learned. Hence why there are pyramids not only in Egypt, but also in Mexico and China. Also why us fallen angels are named differently across the world. We have been given many names from many different tribes. Lucy continues with his plans after this. He in the darkness will then build an army to take over God and his throne. Lucy wants to be God and sit in heaven as God. He has continued to mess with the humans and animals to build armies. The most recent supernatural beings came to the surface during the Dark Ages around the 1200s, hence why they are called the Dark Ages. 800 years ago the darkness rose again, and God brought forth his judges once more, while humans had their hunters. They were almost successful with the purge, but when the Pope signed an agreement with a few supernaturals, they had to learn to live with the beings, and had to establish laws and orders to cease the fighting and slaughter. Most supernaturals want to be left alone, like the ones who turned against their will or were born the way they were, and pose no threat to humans. However, the majority have malice and hate for the humans, and join Lucifer to bring destruction. Many worldwide organizations were made to police the supernatural to integrate them into society. The judges had to agree to an extent, but deep down they want to kill us all. America finally settled on the Black Files in 2019, but this covenant will soon be broken. Lucifer not only wiggled his way into the human governments, but the supernatural ones. The supernatural will try and rise again and rule over humankind. Lucifer and his army will be at the helm as they prepare for war against God and his judges. Many prophecies in the Bible must be fulfilled, and one of them is a one-world government run by a single man. That man will be called the Antichrist. All will pledge allegiance to him and receive a mark on their head or hand. They cannot buy nor sell unless they have the mark showing their pledge to him. This man will lead Lucifer's army. That man can be you, Conway. Ash rubbed Conway's chest a bit, giving him a seductive smile. Your bill outlawing the judges will help us push forward on this plan. Ashera turned to listen to the main speaker. Conway turned his head to acknowledge the man speaking, but he was lost in his thoughts. Everything she had uncovered for him was a lot to take in. He knew of the demons and devils since his childhood. Mammon helped his family and always required sacrifices, but he never knew the ultimate goal for them. Conway scanned the crowd. Men of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds sat. Many were highly ranked in this country. Others Conway didn't know nor ever seen before. Many men and women work in the shadows to pull the strings to make things happen. This place is where the Americans in real power met and pledged allegiance to the darkness and his army. After the speech, the men rose and went to retrieve their robes. The ceremony would commence. Conway was to be front and center to participate in it. Darkness settled in the forest, and the only light that lit the way was large torches. The line snaked its way towards the giant statue deep in the heart of the redwood forest. The men in robes curled around the statue and chanted loudly. Conway followed the other men and watched intently. It was similar to the rituals we did as a child in his home with his family. The leader of the ceremony stepped forward to silence the men. We gather here to anoint a new brother. Conway Ross's. Step forward. The man held his hand out. Conway slowly made his way toward the man. He turned to stand beside the man and face the crowd. His eyes fell on Ashera who stood in the back. She smiled and then turned to speak to a male standing beside her. The darkness covered his face, and Conway could not make out who she was talking to. Conway was a bit nervous and his stomach knotted up. He did not show his nerves, as his face was stone cold with his eyes staring straight ahead. Bring the sacrifices forward. The man called out. From the darkness, a few men emerged leading hypnotized children ranging from 10 to the age of 6. Many were stolen from their homes while others were bought from orphanages. These sick and twisted people were so vile they did unspeakable things to these innocent children. Every year they would snatch and pay for these tiny humans for unspeakable evils. Just like the old days when tribes of people would make their sons and daughters pass through the fire, or sacrifice the children to the demon gods, it was done today. The God of heaven forbade this, but the people didn't listen. Instead, they took these kids to give as a sacrifice to the ancient devils in return for power and wealth. Conway, you must sacrifice and pledge yourself to Lucifer tonight. The man handed him a dagger. Conway looked at him and then at the zombie-like child. If he did this, there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Ashera spoke with her master Lucifer in the cover of darkness. He was watching the ceremony and feeding off the energy and blood they gave to him and his minions. They will begin again raising an army for Conway to rise as an antichrist. The super soldier programs Kurt and Ares started will be doubled. Lucifer spoke with a beautiful voice. The attack on him behind the club will be the Kickstarter to have the hunters and the judges outlawed, Ashera added. Conway doesn't know he is just a face. He won't have any power. I and my children under me only have such power. We control governments in this world. Remember that, Ash, and do not let him know this. Let him live in his fantasy. This fantasy of power I have dangled before him like a carrot. I let him think this so he will follow me right into hell, along with these other pathetic humans. They believe I care for them. They believe all this pageantry is doing something for them. Lucifer let out a laugh of disdain. We have studied humans since the beginning, and they never change. Keep him, Conway, thinking you and I care for him. Keep letting him think he is worth something. He still has a little conscience. He regretted killing Brea, Ashera informed Lucifer. Sear it out of him. I cannot have him feeling guilty, nor trying to get redemption from you-know-who. With that, Lucifer faded into the darkness while Ash bowed in reverence. The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars, whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. The later times are marked by an assault on man's conscience. Men's consciences grow so feeble that they exhibit very little evidence of life as they abandon their faith and listen to seductive spirits and devilish ideologies. It's described in the Bible as a hot iron scorching their consciences. The sin causes a lot of grief at first, and the conscience feels it. Eventually, though, the conscience gets seared to the point of numbness. The conscience loses its ability to warn the believer of transgression at that time. It also loses the capacity to capture the attention of the believer when he is in danger. Men eventually tell lies out of hypocrisy and don't care or feel anything. In this act of killing the child, Conway seared his conscience to the point of no return. After killing the child, Conway did the unforgivable sin of blasphemy to the Holy Spirit to assure there was no turning back. Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is conscious and hardened opposition to the truth, because the Spirit is truth. 1 John 5:6. Conscious and hardened resistance to the truth leads man away from humility and repentance, and without repentance, there can be no forgiveness. Jesus said, I tell you, every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. Anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come. Mountain 12:31-32. God do not refuse to give. Because of his great grace, God sent his Son to die for our sins, the righteous for the unjust. The unwillingness of the sinner to repent and believe is what makes this sin unforgivable. Their determination to reject all proof for Jesus' divine mission, to the point where they even attribute God's attestation of Jesus to the devil. Such purposeful and blasphemous rejection of the gospel, according to Jesus' words, might render the heart incapable of repentance, and leave sinners like these Pharisees beyond redemption. Regardless of whether you have spoken blasphemous words on your own or at the behest of the devil, if you have believed and turned to Christ, you have not committed the sin of unbelief and hatred for Christ. The fact that even Simon Peter, who cursed the Lord on the night of his incarceration, was brought to repentance and restored by the Lord's kindness, reveals the limited nature of this unforgivable sin. If you, like Peter, have occasionally denied Christ out of weakness and sin, but not with hard-hearted blasphemy, you are authorized to speak about Jesus' kindness and grace that forgives sinners. Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is any sin that a person persists in committing, despite the Holy Spirit's convicting influence. Remember that there is no such thing as an unforgivable sin, such as lying, stealing, or murdering, but rather a constant hardening of the heart, and willfully sinning against God and man. 1 Timothy 4:2, Titus 1:15. Stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. Stephen says to the Pharisees in Acts 7:51, "You always resist the Holy Spirit, just as your forefathers did." In a nutshell, the unpardonable sin is any sin that a person refuses to give up, confess, or even ask forgiveness for, as well as refusing to hear from the Holy Spirit about it. Any transgression for which mankind seeks forgiveness is forgiven. Turning our backs on the Holy Spirit's voice, on the other hand, begins to quiet his convictions, and finally, we are unable to hear his convicting power. Because we have reached a stage where we are unable to listen to the Holy Spirit's promptings, this essentially inhibits God's work in our lives. Conway's fate was sealed that night as he continued in the depraved ceremony. Like his forefathers before him, Conway partook in the sin and damned his soul just as the devil wished. The president-elect, along with other men and women of power that night, continued their transgressions well until dawn. Conway finally retired to his cabin with his new consort Ashera. The two would be engaged and due to be married in a black wedding during Halloween in 3 months. Chapter 3. A few months later, Conway was able to pass the law outlawing the judges as well as hunters. It was now illegal to kill, discriminate, or prosecute any supernatural being. New laws and legislation were to be set up. The judges were no longer allowed to act. They were to renounce their calling, God, and duty if they were to live among society. New laws against churches as well were being enforced. If the churches did not teach what the government ordained, they were to shut down. Many judges, pastors, and hunters were caught and thrown into jail. Others were killed by underground supernatural factions. Their deaths were covered up, and no justice was given to them by the American government. Some weaker judges and pastors complied and bowed down to the new government mandates. Some of the weaker judges had turned their back on God and the cow, and bent a knee to the government. They would be allowed to have new jobs when a new system was set up. These laws took effect not only in America but in the rest of the world as well. England, Rome, and Australia were starting to jump on board this bandwagon of canceling out judges and hunters. The black files in the FBI were shut down. Most were fired for not complying with the new laws, and the whole system was suspended until new procedures were to be made and put in place. Lawlessness and chaos began to grow worldwide. The judges and hunters who held back the darkness from humans were no longer allowed to help. Most judges continued their calling underground in secret. This was a very risky business. If caught, the judge or hunter could be executed or thrown into jail. The super soldier program was repackaged and shown to the American people as advanced warfare. Lies about the program were propagated by the media, as well as the growing concern for outlawed judges. The media helped Conway wage war against them. They turned the people against not only judges, hunters, and pastors, but the people who supported them. The country was a powder keg ready to explode into a civil war. Conway rose to popularity in his campaign run. The people who ran things underground in each state would make sure to rig votes in the coming elections in November. Conway was to be president. The false narrative of Republican versus Democrat was only surface pageantry. At the top, the two parties worked for the same person and worked towards the same goal. Politically driven battles between politicians were all just play-acting scenes to make the people believe they had a say in what went on. Conway's job was halfway complete. The outlawing of the judges was a major step in the many-step plan of Lucifer. Next on his agenda was to gather supernatural beings and humans in the super soldier military program to come together to make a new branch of the U.S. military. It was to become an army against God eventually, but in its early stages, it would serve the wishes of the American government. It was much like the SOAP program Ares created in the 60s. Ashera was a strong player in this game. She was the queen, the voice behind Conway whispering evil intentions. She reminded him of his many enemies, and that he needed to eradicate them before they cause an issue. This meant killing everyone involved with the death of his former master, Mammon, as well as Diana. No one was off limits. Conway could not be traced back to these killings, so Ashera set up a meeting between Conway and David Rasputin. David was the son of the famous mystic Grigory Rasputin. Grigory Rasputin was born into a peasant family in the Siberian village of Pokrovskoye, in Tobolsk Governorate's Tyumensky Uyezd, now Yurkovsky district of Tyumen Oblast. In 1897, while on a journey to a monastery, he had a religious conversion experience. Though he held no formal post in the Russian Orthodox Church, he has been described as a monk or stranik, wanderer pilgrim. In 1903 or the winter of 1904-1905, he visited St. Petersburg, where he attracted certain church and social leaders. In November 1905, he met Emperor Nicholas and Empress Alexandra, and became a social figure. Rasputin gained enormous position and authority in court, as a result of the royal family's confidence in his healing abilities. The Tsar designated Rasputin as his lampadnik, lamplighter, a position that granted him regular access to the palace and royal family, in exchange for keeping the lights lighted before religious icons in the palace. By December 1906, Rasputin had grown close enough to the emperor to request a particular favor: the right to change his surname to Rasputinovi, Rasputinu. Nicholas granted the request, and the name change was completed quickly, indicating that he already had the Tsar's approval. Rasputin made the most of his position, collecting payments and sexual favors from admirers, and working tirelessly to further his power. Rasputin quickly became a divisive character, accused of religious heresy and rape by his opponents, suspected of wielding undue political power over the Tsar, and even thought to be having an affair with the Tsarina, Empress of Russia. Rasputin began treating the imperial couple's only son, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia, in late 1906. He was a contentious character at court, considered a mystic, visionary, and prophet by certain Russians and a religious charlatan by others. Before Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg, alternative religious movements such as spiritualism and theosophy had become prominent among the city's elite, and many of the aristocracies were deeply intrigued by the occult and the supernatural. Rasputin's beliefs in weird mannerisms piqued the interest of St. Petersburg's elite, who were bored, cynical, and seeking fresh experiences at the time, according to historian Joseph Furman. His popularity may have been boosted by the fact that he was a native Russian, as opposed to other self-described holy men, such as Nizir Anselm Felipe and Gerard Enkes, who had previously enjoyed popularity in St. Petersburg. Rasputin's dominance peaked in 1915, when Nicholas II left St. Petersburg to lead Russian soldiers fighting in World War I, bolstering both Alexandra's and Rasputin's positions. During the war, however, Russian defeats increased, and both Rasputin and Alexandra grew increasingly unpopular. Rasputin was slain by a gang of conservative noblemen who opposed his influence over Alexandra and Nicholas in the early morning of December 30th, 1916. Before his death, one of Rasputin's many mistresses gave birth to a son. The boy's name was David, and he grew in strength and power under the guidance of his mother. The rich woman followed the teachings of her lover, the mystic, and prepared her son to become anointed in darkness. David grew in power and prestige. Although Rasputin was still alive due to Kurt bringing him back from the dead, David chose not to meet his father. David also had many siblings, but David did not wish to connect with them. He wanted to make his mark on this world and not be a shadow under his father. David led many men into battle during World War II, making a name for himself. After the war, David focused on growing his dark powers and gathering a gang of supernaturals known as Misery. They were mercenaries for hire with no alliance with any government. Many times Lucifer approached David, but David refused to align. David wanted no master but himself. A wizard is born immortal and learns magic from books. A sorcerer is born a sorcerer, with magic within, and learns to harness his powers from a teacher. David was a sorcerer, being his father was a mystic, and the gift was passed down to him. One of the gifts learned along the way was to become ageless. David was well over 100 years old, but he didn't look a day over 35. He had piercing blue eyes that matched the cloudless sky. Along with his beautiful eyes, David had high chiseled cheekbones. His hair was short and brown. The sides were shaved, leaving tufts of hair on top like it was styled in the Roaring Twenties. His suit was also fashioned after the 1920s, as he was a stickler for the era. He was slender but well built. He walked with his head held high in a sort of arrogant way, not in a show-off sort of way, but as a man that knew he was untouchable. He was extremely handsome, but he held it well. He was not vain, nor did he use his good looks to get ahead in life. David always relied on his wisdom and knowledge of magic, as well as the criminal underground, to advance his status. Asher ran into David quite a few times over the century. Each time he refused her advances. He would not even work with her on a professional level due to her sensual and seductive ways. He was nothing like his father. David only courted a few women in his life, and held sex as an intimate thing between two people. David hated his father, and the stories he was told as a child made him almost resent having the last name. Asher knew David would not work for or with her, so she informed Conway he would have to convince David on his own. She knew if Conway was successful, she had to keep her distance and maintain a low profile. Conway and she would have to plan a story for the media as well, with her being his fiancé and all. The story would have to be plausible and sound if anyone was to look into the matter. Ash, or Karina as she was known at the moment, would be doing charity work in Palestine, her home country. The fallen angel would stay in her human form, helping the people of that country for the duration of the time David would be employed for Conway. Nothing was guaranteed, but Ash had a pretty good feeling David would agree. Conway was an upcoming president-elect, and David would have an opportunity to advance in politics in America if he worked with Conway. Ash knew David was recently dabbling in politics, and this would be a perfect opportunity for the both of them. Tracking him down was not hard. Ash knew just where to look and relayed the information to Conway. Conway sent one of his bodyguards to give David an invitation to his new home in Washington, D.C., and David agreed to meet with Conway that night. Conway was used to such meetings after dark. Most of his business happened after the sun went down. During the day Conway put on a pretty face with candy-coated speeches for the masses, but at night is when he did his evil bidding. David entered Conway's home led by a couple of bodyguards. The guards were superhumans pumped with Kurt's experimental drugs to protect Conway against supernatural enemies. No doubt David could take them down as well as Conway if he wanted to. The sorcerer was over a century old and well trained in many different arts of fighting as well as magic. Even though he didn't flex it, David was quite an opponent. Conway's place was set up like any basic rich person's place. Expensive things glittered about and high-tech gadgets were hardly used, more for show. David was shown into Conway's office where Conway sat waiting. The congressman stood up and acknowledged David as he entered. Conway dismissed his guards with a slight hand gesture and poured David a drink. The congressman was a bit more laid back in his home. He wore slacks with a simple polo. Why does a man of such stature as yourself, with everything at his disposal, call a man like me for a chat? David asked as he glanced around the room. His eyes fell on the few medals Conway had from his military time. David knew Conway was a rich boy from Texas who played the political game. I have some stains I need cleaning up. I hear you are the man to hire for such a job as this. Your reputation is well known. Conway sipped his drink and watched David reach for the glass Conway poured him. David brought the glass to his lips, took a small sip, and let the glass rest at his waist. I might be that man, for a price. Money is no issue. Sky's the limit. Oh, I wasn't talking about money. Money will get part of this service, but I am talking about something else to grant this deal and my help. David looked up from his glass and sized up Conway. I want in, you know the game. Government or modern kingship is the ultimate power level you can acquire today. Controlling countries and people, I can only do so much in the criminal world. I want to make that step up, and you are going to help me get my foot in that door. Unlike the other politicians who are wet behind the ears, I know exactly the game that is going on in the world. I know the evils that rule it and the things swept under the rug. I help sweep up the mess most times. Also, if you wish to push the supernatural agenda of having us be a part of society more, supernatural politics are needed. David was straightforward. Conway was expecting this. A sheriff mentioned David wanting to graduate into politics. Conway thought about it for a moment. He would do his best to help David. He was a fellow soldier and an ambitious male like himself. Plus he would be helping Conway out greatly by taking out his underground opponents. I will get you in the door, but I can't guarantee anything. Conway nodded. That is all I ask. Now, what problem do you need me to take care of? David sipped his drink and waited for Conway to gather his words. The fallen ones, as well as I need a few individuals taken out. They were responsible for the death and disappearances of a few high players in the chess game. Mephistopheles, Ares, Mammon, Samuel, as well as a few others. The people need to be taught a lesson as well as snuffed out for my connection to them. I need a clean ledger if I am to be successful in running for president, Conway explained. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of files. Don't worry about any repercussions. Many of these are affiliated with the judges, and can be written off as criminals who were taken in or killed during the confrontation of their crimes against the supernatural. Conway explained. Are there any judges on this list? Yes, a few. That will cost extra, David informed. I am sure it will. Leave me the instructions on payment and how much, and I will have my secretary handle the finances. Conway finished his drink and continued to study David. He wasn't sure if he admired him, or was a bit jealous. Another alpha male with a possibility of taking over his seat of power, but that was hogwash. Conway was selected personally by Lucifer to be the Antichrist. Conway pushed his insecurities aside for the moment and focused on the task at hand. The people needed to be taken out if he had any chance to move forward in his campaign. He could not be linked to them, nor could he risk them coming after him. I will get this done. Screw me over, Conway, and it will be the last thing you ever do. David eyed Conway down. David made sure things were clear between the two before he left. This would be a big job. There were many names on this list, and a few of them were judges. David knew he needed to rally his best men and women to complete this. It would be a very expensive endeavor, but it would be worth it to Conway and David both. This was David's chance to get into the door of politics and set a name for himself. Unknowingly, David was following in his father's footsteps. The very father he hated and strived not to be like. Chapter 4, New York. With the recent outlawing of hunters and judges, Ben had asked Baron Hans to help him relocate and hide his fellow hunter friends. The Baron had the finances and capability to do so and agreed. He and his companions bribed the Valkyrie and William, a super soldier, flew on his private jet out to New York to aid Ben. Ben picked the three up from the private airport and drove them downtown where he was hiding. Bri was happy to see Ben again. He was after all the one who helped her break her contract with Kurt and free her from the misery of working in that bar. She had been enjoying her time in Europe helping Hans and the others to clear the land of evil. Hans had no doubt formed an attraction to the Valkyrie, but Bri tried to brush it off. She was too scared to get into any type of romance due to her past failing ones. This did not stop Hans from doing his best to court the maiden. "How are things on your side of the world, Hans?" Ben asked as he took the back roads back into the city. The city was easier to hide in. The mass amounts of people and abandoned buildings made it easy. The country was dangerous. Small towns with small tight-knit groups of people knew strangers when they came around. Strangers were often watched and reported, and this was a bad thing for Ben. If he was to help his hunter pals, he would have to find a place on the outskirts of the city or even underground. It is just as bad there. The hunters and judges are in the process of being outlawed like they are here. Evil is rising and taking over. The supernaturals are out of control. Dark times are coming for all parts of the world, I am afraid. Hans sighed deeply and glanced out the window. I am enjoying my time in the old country, Bri added. There is that old feeling of home as well as the ancient battles that once occurred. The fighting is still the same. We win some and lose some. Our last battle with a tribe of druids was brutal. Wilhir almost lost an eye, and Pushka lost an arm. Where is Pushka? Ben asked. He stayed behind to guard the castle, as well as have a few more checkups on his arm. He replaced it with an experimental robot type. Cutting-edge tech some scientists have been working on with replacing lost limbs. I felt horrible. One experiment to the next, but at least he volunteered willingly this time. Hans added. William sat quietly beside Hans in the back seat, while the Valkyrie rode shotgun alongside Ben. How is Justin? And Pepper? Bri asked. Pepper is still in Chicago with Luca. He calls now and then to give updates and to ask me how things are. They recently had to go underground, much as we have. Ben's voice was almost sorrowful. They were known as the enemy of the country they had fought all their lives to protect. Bri noticed their change in mood of Ben, and she patted his shoulder. I am sorry. Don't be. I knew this would happen sooner or later. The wickedness of this world is a way of coming to the surface and taking over no matter what. Ben knew eventually the Book of Revelation would be played out. He just didn't think it would be in his lifetime. He wasn't very religious. He did his best to read and follow the Word of God, but sometimes he failed at it. Pepper and Luca would send him a few Bible studies and encourage him to go deeper in the Word, and Ben did try, but the recent events made it harder for him. Justin is with Ka. I haven't heard from them in a while, but the last time I did, Justin had shed a few pounds and was doing great. Bri and Ben continued to chit-chat about a few things as Hans and Will sat quietly in the back seat. William was always deep in thought. He hardly ever spoke unless he needed to. Hans was normally the life of the conversion, but the recent events had him troubled. The laws would greatly affect him and his homeland, no doubt. He would, like the hunter and the judges, become an outlaw, no doubt. Hans reached down to dig his phone from his pocket when suddenly a great jolt rocked him. A car slammed into the backside of Ben's SUV, sending it spinning. When it stopped, a hail of bullets came raining down on the vehicle. Instinctively, the four got as low as they could, while Will did his best to shield his boss and friend Hans. Ben tried to press on the gas, but the front of the car was rocked again by another collision. Glass shattered and metal whined as it was scraped and mashed. Bri was the first out of her seatbelt. She used her elbow to knock the remaining window out. Once the gunfire ceased, she quickly leaped out with her pistol raised. Her blonde hair was flowing in the slight breeze, and she could feel warm blood dripping on the side of her face, but she ignored it. Her eyes were open for the threat at hand. The men in the two vehicles that hit Ben's finally hopped out. Bri was able to shoot one, but she quickly had to duck to avoid gunfire. She slid beside the back door and opened it. Hans glanced down with a nervous smile at her. "Well, hello, love," Bri growled. How could he be flirting in the middle of a gunfight? Bri grabbed Hans by his collar and plopped him out on the asphalt beside her. William kicked the door out and released his bullets upon the few men that advanced toward him. Ben tried to get out, but his seatbelt was jammed. As he went for his knife, a male jumped on top of the hood of the SUV and glanced down at Ben. "Long time no see, old pal." A chilling familiar voice rang out and Ben looked up in horror. It was Jake Ryder. Jake and he had served together in the Navy SEALs. Unlike Ben, Jake had a thirst for blood. When he exited the SEALs, Jake took up many different assassin gigs. He later fell into the super soldier program and was trained to work alongside Kurt. After Kurt's passing, David quickly picked up the soldier and made him part of his team or misery. Jake punched through the glass of the vehicle and yanked Ben out. Ben went flying on top of the car that was still smashed into his. The pain shot through Ben's body, causing him to yell in pain. William saw Jake about to attack Ben, and quickly hopped on the car to defend the hunter. While the two super soldiers fought, Bri and Hans were in a firefight. The other men were not as strong as Jake. They were just normally mercenaries and thugs Jake hired to help him take down Ben, the Baron, and William. Bri was not on the list, but since she was fighting alongside them, she was the enemy and needed to be terminated. The SUV started to smoke, making Bri and Hans push forward toward the men firing at them. The Valkyrie glanced on top of the hood of the vehicle and noticed Will and the other soldier fighting. She could tell the man was just as strong as Will, and no doubt a super. Many of the super soldiers were either so brainwashed that they could not go against their masters or so bloodthirsty that even if they could leave they didn't want to. Will was fortunate he was in the process of healing due to the Baron and Bri's help. Pushka was the same as William and Bri wished he was there to help them, but he was back in Europe healing. Smoke billowed around William and Jake as they fought hand to hand, blow for blow. It wasn't until Ben tried to kick Jake off the hood did they let up. Jake jumped and flipped backward off the hood to avoid Ben's leg sweep. William followed after Jake with his flip. He knew he was the only one beside Bri that could take on Jake. Ben slid off the hood and landed on the glass-littered asphalt below. He let out a yell and a few curse words as the pain continued to worsen. Bullets ricocheted off the ground towards Ben as he did his best to find cover. The SUV's smoke slowly turned into small flames, and the others knew they needed to make their way far from the cars before they exploded. The only problem was the vehicles were the only cover. The road they were wrecked on was desolate. It wasn't too far from the city, but there was no building around. A few patches of woods were half a mile away, but the four were in trouble if they could not fend these men off. Bri shot another one of the dozen of men that rushed the Baron and her. The outcome of this was not looking too bright for them. Bry shot 2 more men and dropped her empty magazine. Baron covered her with his rapid gunfire as she reloaded. 3 more enemy men were hit and landed on the ground dead. Bry reloaded and retrieved a long Viking sword from her side. She leaped into the air and brought the sword down on the men, as Hans continued to shoot and hit the ones surrounding her. He was always amazed at her agility and warrior strength in battle. The way she swung her sword cutting down enemies was poetry to him. As Hans was distracted for a mere moment, one of the men knocked him down. The man pointed a gun in his face and was about to shoot Hans. William quickly turned to throw a knife at the man about to shoot Hans. The knife meets its mark, but so did Jake's knife. Jake plunged his knife into William's neck, killing the fellow soldier. The Baron saw this and let out a scream in anger. Ben mustered up all the strength he had left to tackle Jake. The two went rolling away from the cars just as they erupted in flames. The blast sent Bry flying into the man she was fighting in front of her, causing the two to hit the ground. Hans quickly shielded his face when the blast shook them. The heat and stench of burning metal and tires filled their lungs. Hans went to crawl towards William, but it was too late. The soldier was dead and now on fire due to the explosion. Ben did his best to punch Jake in the face, but the super soldier was too quick. He blocked the punch and soon got Ben in a headlock. Jake slowly began to choke the hunter. Ben struggled to break free from Jake's chokehold, but he could feel himself blacking out. Bry noticed Jake was choking Ben, and the Valkyrie knew she needed to help before he too would perish. She did her best to fight off the remaining men, but her sense of urgency made her sloppy. One of the men shot her in the shoulder, slowing her down. She did her best to finish off the men so she could get to Ben. He needed her help more than ever now. Well, it looks like it is the end of the line for you, Benny. Conway sends his regards. Jake pulled out another knife and stabbed Ben repeatedly in the side. Bry pushed the man off her sword and noticed what Jake was doing. She let out a vicious scream as she ran towards the 2 men on the ground. The Valkyrie brought down her sword towards Jake's head, but Jake let Ben go and rolled out of the way. She swung at him with malice, but Jake dodged most of her blade swipes. The last swipe did catch Jake on the side, causing him to grunt in pain. Bry elbowed Jake in the face and tried to swing her sword against, but Jake caught it. The blade sunk deep in his hand as he held on to it with clenched teeth. "So sorry, Valkyrie, but you were a bit too late," he growled as the sharp blade cut into his palm. Blood leaked down to the hilt and over Bry's hands, as she did her best to try and bring the sword down on top of Jake. "My mission was not for you, but you will be a bonus." Jake went to swing with his other hand to punch her in the face, but Bry did a split and punched him square in the private parts. "I guess all of you isn't super," she yelled as she yanked her sword out of his grip downward, and brought the sword up into his bottom jaw. The blade almost cracked due to the force she heaved upwards into Jake's skull. The super soldier fell over dead. Bry let her sword drop to the ground as she quickly scooted toward Ben, who was behind her. She pressed her hands on his bleeding side, trying to stop the blood. Hans used his coat to put William's body out and laid it over his dead and scorched friend. He then made his way towards the crying Valkyrie to see how he could help. Bry cupped Ben's face as she watched him gasp for air. The blade pierced his lung, and she could feel the blood and air pushing out between her fingers. "I am so sorry, Ben," she sobbed, trying to help her friend. Ben smiled up at her and whipped a tear from her cheek. "Don't be. You are free, now free my brother hunters." Those were his last words before he passed. Bry laid her head on his chest and sobbed. Hans felt a lump form in his throat as he watched his friend die. The anger and sadness were raging deep inside the Baron. He places a hand on Bry's shoulder and with his other hand, he closes Ben's eyes. The mournful moment was interrupted by another car screeching to a halt behind them. Bry wasted no time as she reached for Ben's gun and aimed it at the car. A black woman exited the car with hands raised. Judge Starr. I was the one to meet Ben at the rendezvous. You guys were late, so I decided to come search for you all. Bri lowered her gun as the woman walked forward. Ben was supposed to meet me an hour ago to discuss a move of a group of hunters. She spoke as she walked toward them. Her words ceased when she saw the carnage before her. Oh, my goodness. Ben, no. She lowered her head in respect and fell silent. Bri wipes her tears and picks Ben's lifeless body up. Hans, get William. We need to bury them. After we will ride with you, Judge. Ben's dying wish was for us to help the hunters, and we will. Chapter 5. Lovelock, Nevada. Paiute Tribe. Almost every Native American origin story has elements of both giants and a massive flood. Cannibalistic giants roamed the planet in the last world, eating on and interbreeding with humans, according to the Hopi. Masa, the intermediary between the creator and man, came down from the skies and told the chief, who is still pure in his bloodline, to take his family underground with the people, while the creator destroys all the giants in a big flood, according to the Hopi. He Navajo tells of the white shell woman Okastistan, chief goddess, and her twin miracle-working sons. Their father was the sun, and his name meant slayer of alien gods in Navajo. These twin brothers would go on to kill a slew of birds, animals, rock, and human creatures, including giants, who were annihilating the Earth's population. According to the Pawnee, the creator grew the first people to enormous proportions, and they roamed the plains, devouring everything in sight, including the subsequent creation of man. So he summoned a flood to wipe them all, but not before instructing the pure among them to construct a wooden ball, load it with food and water, crawl inside, and seal it with sap. The Apaches mention a race of giants known as Gintups. They claim to live in the Superstition Mountains caverns and beyond. The Pima recounts a creation narrative in which the people got so severely perverted that the deity had to wipe them out with a tremendous flood. The chief's descendants made it to the top of the Superstition Mountains, where they took shelter from the floodwaters. A similar creation narrative is told by the Gila people. The Yavapai also spoke about a massive flood that erupted from either Montezuma's well in the Very Valley, or the massive crack on the west side of Red Butte, just south of Fountain Hills. We're all familiar with the traditional Native American greeting of raising one hand and uttering how, or, more precisely, ho. This greeting was employed by every Native American tribe, but the majority of Plains Indians did it while showing their right hand. I have spoken, the term implies. A quick search of old Native American tribes for giants reveals that, while giants lived across the continent, they were particularly prevalent in the plains and Southwest. This isn't to suggest they couldn't be found all over North America, since they most certainly could. The preponderance of evidence has been discovered in the American Southwest, including legends and stories pointing to the Great Plains. While we're on the subject, it's worth noting that strangers raising their hands from afar are equally common. So much so that scientific research has been done on it. Something about humans makes us want to extend our hands to strangers when we first meet them. We wave both hello and farewell, come to think of it. Is it just evolutionary behaviorism at work? Every tribe on the planet, without exception, has legends about giants with 6 fingers. Not only stories but also voluminous documents were kept within religious and historical writings, where writing had been invented. Giants were known to be cannibals, ferocious, and more animalistic than humans in all societies. They were highly powerful and destructive monsters who preyed on humanity, which is why the flood happened. The reason for the lifting of the hand was to show how many fingers you possessed. 5 fingers signaled to the Native Americans you were of human origin, while 6 fingers were an implication you were a giant. Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, the daughter of a Paiute Indian chief, wrote down the legend in 1883. Her forefathers drove a weird red-haired clan of cannibals into a cave and smothered them by starting a fire at the cave's entrance. She claimed that the people-eaters were so ferocious that they would leap into the air, snatching arrows speeding by, and shooting them back at their foes. The Paiutes gave the giants the name Ka, which means two leaders. According to legend, the giants weaved rules, a fibrous water plant, into rafts to traverse across what remained of Lake Lahontan. The Paiutes, a Native American tribe native to sections of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, portrayed the Ka as a violent, unapproachable race who killed and ate their captives, and told early settlers that after years of battle, all of the tribes in the area banded together to expel the giants. Despite pleas that they come out in battle, the fleeing giants took sanctuary in Lovelock Cave and refused to leave. To force the giants out of the cave, their pursuers piled brush into the entrance and set it on fire. The few survivors were assassinated very immediately. The giants who remained in the cavern died of suffocation. Eliza Jameson was taught these very stories growing up in her tribe. Her ancestors came from a long line of hunters, the very hunters who killed these giants long ago. Her grandmother told her that she had a deep link to the supernatural and the Great Spirit of God. At the age of 11, Eliza's mother died of an overdose, so her care was left to her grandparents. The older Native Americans owned a gas station outside of town and did their best to raise Eliza. The station was located 5 miles from the famous Lovelock Cave. The cave where the last of the giants were killed. Eliza was never really told who her father was. She just knew he was a white man who worked for the government. Her grandparents hated him for leaving their daughter to raise Eliza alone, and always talk bad about him. You may have your father's last name, but he is nothing to you. Her grandmother would curse. It upset Eliza, and she wanted to know the truth about her father, but she respected her grandparents and didn't ask. Eliza was a quiet and shy young woman. She would lose herself in her books or short stories she would write in her journal. She was a hopeless romantic at heart, but too shy to seek after the boys on the tribal land. Eliza always wore a lion necklace her mother gave her. Her mother told her that Eliza's father gave it to her when Eliza was born, saying one day it would be for Eliza. So many mysteries died with her mother, and Eliza hated it. She wanted to know the truth and secrets revolving around her father. She also wanted to know more about her mother and why her mother did what she did, but her grandparents forbade her from asking. Eliza figured it was either one or two things why they didn't want to discuss this. The information was too much for them to relive, or they wanted to protect Eliza from the heartache, or possibly both. Eliza grew up always making up scenarios in her mind of what might have happened. Maybe a supernatural being took her father and her mother couldn't live without him and numbed her pain with drugs. Maybe the government took him and killed her mother, making it look like a suicide. Eliza left her thoughts to wonder, but eventually, when she was old enough, she would look into the mystery. When Eliza graduated from high school, she started to help her grandparents out by working at the gas station. She didn't have any urge to pursue college, and she had no idea what kind of career she could get into. She loved to read and write, but felt she was not good enough to become a journalist or novelist. She didn't have much self-esteem or faith in herself, even though she was very good at her talent. She did work part-time at the library, but she spent more time reading than working most days. Her grandmother would always fuss at her to get her head out of a book and find a decent job. Elsa would just roll her eyes and smile. She wanted to help her grandparents out as much as possible. The mixture of wanting to aid them, plus the fear of leaving and being on her own, stopped her from pursuing a life elsewhere. That, on top of the shyness and self-esteem issues, caused the 20-year-old to stay planted in her hometown. Slowly as she grew older, the normal routines started to grow old on her. The routines of life's monotony chipping away at her caused her to start to become depressed. She knew deep inside she was meant for more. Like her purpose in life was greater than this. Eliza would wish she was brave enough to step out in the world and travel and do great things like the people in her books, but a part of her was scared and too used to the comfort of her home. Things, however, would start to change over time. Eliza would start to have nightmares around her 21st birthday. They were subtle at first, but over the months they grew violent. She progressed to the point of waking up in sweats, swearing she heard the roar of a lion ring out in her room. She explained this to her grandmother. The nightmares consisted of dark, violent wars, fighting, and bloodshed, along with lions in her dreams manifesting. Her grandmother did her best to comfort her, but she knew the time had come. Eliza needed to know who and what she was. You will soon learn of your heritage from your father's side, child. I have taught you the ways of our people, your mother's people, but another must come and teach you the ways of your father. The grandmother explained as she held both of Eliza's hands. I don't understand, grandmother. Eliza looked up from her lap and into the old wrinkled eyes of her grandmother. You will. I promise. I am so sorry I did not tell you everything, but I did my best to shelter and protect you from that world. As much as I tried to stop it, the Great Spirit has other plans for you. I need to call your cousin. He can explain everything to you. I pray he can come in person to do this. The grandmother hung her head in shame. Eliza knew it must have been hard for her and her grandfather to live with such information, and not be able to speak of it. Eliza hugged her grandmother to let her know she was not angry, and respected her for trying to shield her from this hard truth. Eliza was finally going to get the answers that she spent sleepless nights thinking about. The grandmother laid Eliza back down and covered her with a blanket. Get some rest. She leaned down and gave a kiss on her forehead before walking out. She then waddled to the kitchen and picked up the telephone. Her crooked fingers searched in the notebook beside it and began to dial the number written down. On the fourth ring, a British male picked up the phone. Hello. Colin Jameson. This is Willow, mother of Kim. You know Kim, the one that was married to your Uncle Finn Jameson. She paused, waiting for a response. Colin was a bit flabbergasted and stumbled to get his words out. The Lion Judge had not heard or talked to his uncle in decades. Flynn had departed from the judges and went rogue around the 60s. However, he still kept in touch with his family from time to time. Colin's father had said that his brother was once a well-known doctor and judge, but fell on hard times after his first wife died. Flynn left his practice and joined many rogue mercenary groups. He was soon approached by Ares and signed up for the SOAP program. After Vietnam, Flynn bounced around different government classified fields. One was based on the Philadelphia experiment that occurred in WW2. The military wanted to press forward and develop the experiment in invisibility and teleportation that had failed. A few of the experiments even dabbled in time travel. In the 80s, Flynn blacklisted himself from the military in the 80s, and decided to hide out at the family manor in England. During that period he helped shape Connor and Colin's life. While their father was away tending to judge duties with their elder sister, Flynn took the boys under his wings, and taught them about their powers and potential. Connor eventually followed in Flynn's footsteps and gave up the judge's mantle, but Colin felt different. It was his duty and calling to be a judge. In the early 90s, Flynn fled to America to evade the judges catching him. He found a deserted place in Nevada and remarried. That was the last his family had heard from him and presumed him dead. It was a shock to Colin that Flynn had a daughter. No doubt she had inherited one or many of the judge gifts, as well as the family trait of line shifting. Most in their family start early with the shift, but others, much like their sister, did not shift until she was an adult. Yes, this is Colin. I am sorry I just haven't heard from my uncle for quite a while, nor did I know who he was married to. Colin explained to the elder woman. He left our daughter to raise his child many moons ago. We did our best to teach and guide her, but her father's curse is upon her. She needs guidance, and this is the only number I had left before he departed. You must come and aid Eliza. Also, judges here are being imprisoned and killed. If she is of the judges as well as the lion, she is in great trouble. We cannot protect her. Also, the tribe will not understand your ways. Her only hope is to go with you, Jameson. I understand. Give me your address and I will catch the first flight out. Colin pulled out a pen and paper from his nightstand drawer and turned the light on. A growl came from the other side of the bed. Kitty, now Colin's wife, turned to glare at him. Colin had recently retired and moved back to his hometown. He settled in his family manor with Kitty, and the two had been enjoying the quiet life. It was only a matter of time before this would happen, especially after the new laws in America that were slowly spreading worldwide. Normally Colin would decline, but Eliza was family, and he would never abandon family. After taking down the info, Colin hung up the phone. He tossed the tablet and cell phone back on the nightstand and ran a hand through his already messy blonde hair. Kitty laid a hand on her husband's chest and glanced up at him. Colin knew Kitty wanted to know what was going on without her even having to speak. I guess the retirement plans are out the window, Colin grumbled. Kitty let out another growl, and he placed an arm around her, pulling her close. I know, but it is family. My uncle, his daughter, has never been told who and what she is. Her grandmother told me she is starting to shift at night. I have to help her. Now more than ever. That bloody Conway has made judges and hunters illegal. No doubt she is in danger. Especially if she doesn't know what she is. Kitty understood. She nodded slowly and curled herself around him, falling back asleep. Colin tried to do the same, but couldn't. So many thoughts were flooding his mind. The UK was not as strict as America in the judge laws, but no doubt in the future it would follow suit. At least at the Jameson Manor, they were safe. Leaving would be dangerous. Colin planned to fly out to Nevada and retrieve his cousin, then bring her back home to train her. But things never go as planned. Chapter 6. A few days later, that night was foggy and cold. The desert air would often drop to almost freezing at night. It always fascinated Eliza. Such a hot and sunny desert during the day turned out to be the opposite at night. Most nights Eliza would often lay on her lawn stargazing and lost in her imagination. Being lonely, she found things to keep her mind busy, such as creating stories in her mind. That night, however, she did not have the time to lay around and get lost in her thoughts. Eliza was too close to the gas station that night, since her grandfather was feeling under the weather. Eliza packed her purse with snacks and grabbed a bottle of water before leaving the small home. The gas station was about a mile from the house, so Eliza would often just walk to her job. For the most part, the tribal lands were safe and not much crime occurred, but that night it would be different. As she walked down the quiet and dark road, Eliza kept her sight on the stars above. Not paying attention to where she was walking, her foot caught a loose rock, and Eliza almost tripped. She stopped walking and bent down to brush the dirt off her shoes and tie her loose shoestrings. As she did, a van passed by behind her. Eliza paid it no mind since cars passed by due to it being a major highway. It was a mistake on her part. The van slammed to a halt, and the door slid open. The nose of the sketching tires made her glance behind her, just as two pairs of hands reached out. They grabbed Eliza and yanked her into the van. Eliza screamed and her voice echoed into the empty desert. One man was driving while the other two pinned Eliza down. Quick and easy meal. One man laughed with his mouth hung open. Eliza glanced up at him as she struggled and saw large fangs protruding from his mouth. Eliza had never seen such a creature, and the fear of the situation and the two men holding her caused her to scream. The man bent down to bite her neck, but his fangs turned to human teeth. This made both men tilt their heads. Dude, what is going on? Biter. The other man egged him on. I am trying. He confessed, but his teeth would turn to human teeth when he got closer to her. The other male's teeth also slowly disappeared, and their ash-white skin began to turn a peach color. Eliza was still freaking out as she wiggled underneath the men's grip. What is going on back there? The driver turned around to see the two vampires turn human as they held Eliza. Eliza glanced at each of the men as her heart raced. She was just as clueless as these men were. Biter. The driver proclaimed. I can't. I am human. The one man looked down at his hands in disbelief. Eliza saw her opportunity and kicked the one man off of her. The man flew out the side of the van. The other man went to punch her, but his hand was grabbed from behind. The man turned to see who caught his arm, but she was met with a set of large teeth clamping down on him and golden eyes. A giant lion tore at his flesh and tossed him from the van. The van rocked as the lion leaped over Eliza, who was now in a curled-up ball crying. The lion attacked the driver and tore the vampire to shreds. After the screaming stopped, the lion turned to Eliza, licking his chops. Eliza. He spoke in a gruff tone. Her brown eyes peeked from under her long tangled black hair towards the sound of her name. She blinked a couple of times, looking at the lion staring down at her. Did this lion just talk? Eliza, get up. We must go. The lion jumped on the side of the van and waited for Eliza. It took a few more minutes for Eliza to react to this. She was still in shock over the fact she was almost killed. On top of this fact, a lion just killed these three men, and now a lion was talking to her. Eliza. The lion spoke once more, causing her to snap out of her traumatic state. She quickly got to her feet and leaped out of the van. Who are you? What are you? What are they? She points to the groaning men on the ground. The lion shifted back into his human form and quickly stepped into the clothes at his feet. I am Colin Jameson, your cousin. These men are vampires, or they were. Colin was just as confused as to why these two men were human, and the driver was a vampire. Come on, I will explain everything to you when we get to your house. We need to get out of here. Colin picked up his gray trench coat and tie from the ground, and sprinted towards his car, which was a couple of feet away. Eliza glanced once more at the men before following Colin. She quickly got into the passenger seat and put her seatbelt on. Colin put the car in drive and sped away from the scene. Can you please tell me just what in the heck is going on? Eliza finally was able to utter. Your grandmother called me to come and pick you up. Eliza, your father, Flynn Jameson, is my uncle. He and my family come from a long line of Shophetim judges and lion shifters. What are judges? Lion shifters. She repented, trying to wrap her mind around everything. Did your grandmother ever tell you of the spirit realm? Colin asked. Yes, something about me coming from a line of giant hunters on my mother's side. She never told me about my father. Judges are chosen soldiers gifted by God with abilities. We are the ones who fight against the enemies of darkness, the evil supernatural beings that wish to harm humanity. Your father Flynn was a judge. He stepped away from the calling and went rogue. Flynn joined the American military and bounced around so much. We haven't heard from him since the 90s. I didn't even know you existed till a few days ago. Your grandmother called me. She said you had been shifting at night in your sleep, and she had no idea how to explain this all to you or even help you with your abilities. I turned into a lion. That would explain some of the crazy dreams I have been having. What about those men? Vampires? She asked. The supernatural has been running rampant since Conway signed the bill, in effect causing us judges and hunters to become illegal. Those men were criminals on a night run. But what I can figure out is how they became human. Colin ran a hand over his stubble as he thought out loud. I can teach you the ways of a judge as well as help you with your line shifting abilities, but whatever else God has blessed you with, that is up to you to master. An example is that I can tell if someone is lying or not. I also can get the truth out of someone if I press hard enough. Colin explains. So judges are like blessed humans? Eliza asked. Yes. Colin sped down the highway back towards Eliza's house. How do I know you are telling the truth? Eliza turned her head to look at Colin. Colin met her gaze and then noticed her lion pendant around her neck. That lion pendant was Phil's All Our Family Has One. Look. He grabbed his trench coat and showed her the pinned lion pendant that was on his coat. Elias took the coat and stared at the pendant. She then compared it to her necklace, and they were an exact match. So, you are my family. Yes, I am your cousin. My father and your father are brothers. Like I said, we come from a long line of line-shifting judges. Our manor is in England, and I came to bring you there to train you. Also to protect you. Being a judge nowadays is even more dangerous than before. For centuries the judges have been holding back the darkness, working alongside mankind. Now we are considered enemies. We are the ones being hunted due to our faith and our beliefs. There is a war raging. Lucifer is on one side trying to poison this world and humankind's souls. On the other side, God and his people are fighting against the darkness. I know it is a lot for you to take in, but I need you to learn fast. Our lives are in danger. Colin frowned a bit. He pulled into Eliza's driveway and parked the car. Go and say your goodbyes. Also, pack essentials. We need to leave quickly. Colin explained. Eliza was trying to take all this information and process it. She always wanted to explore the world, but not be rushed out like this. Not to be on the run and hunted like a criminal or prey. Eliza didn't move. She sat there with her hand on the handle of the door staring down at the floor. I know this is a lot for you. Especially all at once, but we need to get going. No doubt the vampire will tell others about you, and if you stay, not only your life is in danger, but your grandparents and tribe. I need to take you to the manor. There you will be safe and I can train you properly, but I can't make you do anything. You must make this decision on your own. Eliza opened the door and looked at Colin with a sideways glance. I will go with you. Give me 20 minutes. She sighed deeply and quickly hopped out of the car. Colin watched her disappear into her house before taking out his cell phone. He gave his wife Kitty a call as he waited for Eliza to pack up her things and come back to the car. Eliza ran into the house and quickly checked on her grandfather. He was asleep in bed and she didn't want to disturb him. Her grandmother was still at the gas station, most likely waiting on Eliza. Eliza grabbed her phone and gave the store a ring. Grandma, Colin has come to take me to my father's family home, I think. I know it is too much to explain. I am sorry. Eliza held onto the phone as she ran to her bedroom. No need to explain. I called him. You go with him and learn the ways and abilities that the Great Spirit has blessed you with. I love you, granddaughter. I love you too. Elias hung up the phone and stuffed it back into their pockets. She then walked to her closet and searched for her suitcase. She pulled the rose-printed suitcase out from the top of her closet and began to toss clothes and shoes inside of it. She also tossed her journal as well as other hygiene products inside. Eliza reached over and opened the drawer to her nightstand. She grabbed her small photo album and tossed it inside the overstuffed suitcase. She then sat on the suitcase so she could get it closed and zipped up. Her thoughts were racing about everything that was happening to her. It was as if this was just a dream and at any moment she would awake in a sweat in her bed like before. Eliza stood up and took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and tried to calm down. Ever since she jumped, her heart had been racing. After a couple of deep breaths, she opened her eyes. This was no dream, This was her reality and she needed to accept it. She quickly grabbed her suitcase from her bed and rolled it behind her as she exited the house. Here is to the adventure. Chapter 7. Eliza sat in the passenger seat of Colin's car trying to get some rest. All of the recent events had tired her out, and the car ride to the airport would take a few hours, so Eliza decided to take a nap. Colin drove on silently, trying to figure out where to even begin with training Eliza. He had trained other judges before, but they had known of the danger and the basics of a judge. Eliza knew nothing. She had no fighting skills nor any knowledge of how to handle any supernatural being. Also, Colin had no idea what her extra abilities were. On top of this, she was just starting to shift and did not know the power of the lion. He had his work cut out for him. Not to mention the fact that judges were outlawed here in America. No doubt the same thing would happen in the UK, but at least he had time to prepare before that happened. Here in America, it was like the Old West for judges and hunters. They were being not only outlawed but targeted as well. The lights of the city woke Eliza from her slumber. She sat up in the seat and rubbed her eyes a bit. She watched the window as the cars passed by as well as the many buildings below the overpass. We have a flight out to New York in a few hours, then straight to the UK, Colin explained. Are you doing okay? He asked. Eliza shrugged a bit as she was shy and introverted. Colin was family, but she didn't know him, so it was a bit awkward for her to hold a conversation with him. After we get checked in the airport, we can grab a bite to eat. I am sure you are hungry. Also, feel free to ask me any questions. Colin peeped at her from the corner of his eye. She was almost pressed against the glass looking out the window, lost in the outside world. In ancient times, God raised Shophetim, judges to deal with his people. To not only judge the people, but enforce the laws. Also to help defend and destroy the enemy. Now, the time has come for the judges to return. The supernatural has always walked beside the natural human world, but due to the incline of darkness rising, it was time for the judges to make a return to defend the innocent and dish out justice. Modern-day judges still do much like the old ways. All trace their lineage back to the 12 tribes of Israel. They serve as leaders and execute the laws in the land they govern. Not man's laws, but God's. Most major cities have one judge, and that judge is replaced by the oldest sibling. If there's more than one sibling, they have the option of becoming a wandering judge. The wandering judges wander about the world to help other judges, towns, agencies, and individuals with dishing out law and order, as well as the Lord's vengeance and justice. Colin paused to turn into the airport parking garage. After he parked, he continued to explain to Eliza what they were. Most judges have their unique abilities, granted unto them individually by God based on their talents, but all can see into the spirit realm. The judges have the power to decide justice and punishment right then and there on the spot, while agents have to bring the creature in, unless it is a life or death situation. Agents are the police and judges are the judges. Like the judicial system, our word is the last. We are often aided by angels in taking down the strongholds and powers of darkness. Two kingdoms are at war, the light and the dark. Each has rank and army. The judges are the generals. It is black and white, there is no gray area. I wanted to make it clear that the agents of the darkness are not cool, hip, or awesome. Evil is evil, but in these times evil is called good and good evil. Jesus said that would happen, but in this series, I call it how it is. All evil and powers given by Satan are darkness. All witchcraft, speaking with the dead, divination, horoscopes, etc. is not of God. Most do not understand or want to believe. The dead are dead. These say ghosts are just crafty demons. People have a chance to repent, turn from their ways, and strive to live for God. They are given this chance, But if they deny it, the sentence is given by the judge. So the supernatural has always been with humans? Eliza asked. It was prominent before the flood. After the flood, they did try to rise again but were shut down. The most recent supernatural beings appeared around the year 1200, which is why they are referred to as the Dark Ages. The darkness returned 800 years ago, and God sent forth his judges once more, while humans had their hunts. When the Pope preached to deal with a few supernaturals, they had to learn to live with the beings, and develop laws and orders to stop the war and bloodshed. Most supernaturals, such as those who have been changed against their choice or who were born with no threat to humans, desire to be left alone. The judges were forced underground and hunted by other chasers or hunters underground. The ancient judges were individuals, each from a different tribe of Israel, described as chosen by God to rescue the people from their enemies and establish justice. The book of Judges in the Bible mentions 12 leaders who judged Israel: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. Us judges today can each trace their lineage back to the original judges of ancient times. The first of the modern judges began in the 1800s. Only a few humans were given the power of the judges. Among them were Catherine the Great, Daniel Boone, Wyatt Erup, and many more across the globe. During the 1900s, the judges gathered together in Jerusalem and created an elder group of judges that would govern the others and pass laws as well as judgment. This was known as the Cowd, or Council. Colin exited the car and popped the trunk. He handed Eliza her suitcase and then grabbed his bag. We had an alliance with the world's human governments. Here in America, we helped the FBI set up a sort of polling division of the supernatural. It was called the Black Files. I helped run the New Orleans division about 5 years ago. It has been shut down, no doubt. Colin sighed as he walked alongside his young cousin toward the airport. I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to learn it and learn it quickly. We don't have the luxury to sit and study this out over years. The majority of judges learn in childhood and train all their life. You have to get the crash course. Colin and Eliza entered the airport and began to check in. After their tickets were scanned and their bags checked and sent off to be loaded, Colin took Eliza to get a quick bite to eat. We have around 20 minutes before we board. Eat up. Colin sat a hamburger in front of her. Eliza thanked him and began to eat slowly. You don't say much. Eliza looked up from her burger. Sorry, no, it is fine. I know it is a lot to take in, and you just met me. Don't worry. I am used to silence. My wife doesn't speak much either. Colin chuckled. You are married, yeah. Her name is Kitty. She is back at the manor. I am sure she will like you. She can also help train you to fight better than I can. He chuckled. I never fought before. I never even punched anyone in my life. Eliza confessed. I think that you might be making a big mistake trying to take me and train me. I don't think I have what it takes. Being a judge seems like a great responsibility. Like a grand adventure fighting epic battles against the enemy for God and all, but I don't think I can. I am just me. Eliza tried to put her thoughts into words, but they were not coming out quite right. Colin gave her a warm smile. You are a Jameson. I understand this is a lot to unpack and take in, but know this. God chose you. If he is for you, no one can come against you. Have faith in him and yourself. And please trust me. I know trust takes a while to earn, but now I am family. I will be there for you no matter what. Colin watched her go back to eating before glancing around the airport. What about you? Got any hobbies? He asked, trying to make small talk as well as to try and get to know her better. Not really. I like to write and read. Also, enjoy stargazing, I guess. She took a long sip of her drink and glanced up at him. You? She asked. Colin let out a chuckle. I like to nap. Eliza couldn't help but grin a bit. My brother and I used to go running when we were young. We would get in trouble for shifting and scaring people. He added. You have a brother? Yes, and an older sister. She is the judge of our region. Connor, well, he kinda followed down the path your father did. He stepped away from being a judge. I believe he is running his criminal military group. Any kids? No, not yet. I wouldn't mind having a few. I am not sure Kitty would like that. She had a troubled past. Her father trained her and her two brothers to be killers at a young age. Charlie got out of it at a young age. He grew up to be a scientist and even worked for me for a few years. Her older brother I never met. Colin explained. What about my father? Eliza asked. Finally, she was getting all the answers she had always wanted to know. Besides him going rogue and all, what is he like? She asked. Well, he used to be a doctor while in school to be trained as a judge with my father. He is pretty laid back, I suppose. The opposite of my father. Colin chuckled. He would take us out and teach us about our ancestors and the ways of the lion. Father wanted us to focus more on our judicial duties. I do miss him. I know he left you and your mother, but I am sure he had a good reason to. I am not trying to justify what he did, but just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt is all. Eliza nodded and agreed with Colin. Do you think he is still alive? She asked as she finished her food. I think so. He is good at hiding and adapting to his surroundings. I hope we can eventually locate him. Colin was about to continue to another question, but their flight was called over the intercom. Eliza stood up, threw her trash away, and proceeded to follow Colin towards their plane terminal. The flight was about 5 hours long. Eliza sat quietly reading a book she bought at the airport, while Colin kept an eye on his surroundings. Colin wasn't worried about Eliza talking to anyone, nor was he worried she would raise an alarm about who they were. The young woman barely spoke as it was. Colin was more worried about being spotted by the enemy. Luckily for them, it was a small plane and a red-eye flight. Hardly anyone was on board, and if they were asleep. The quiet, along with the fact Colin had been up for almost 24 hours, were taking a toll on the lion. He glanced around one last time before laying his head back to catch a quick nap. As the plane was close to landing in New York, Colin awoke when the flight attendant announced they would be landing soon, and to put their seatbelts on. Colin glanced down at Eliza and watched her close her book. She buckled her seatbelt and glanced up at him. You snored, she whispered and let out a small chuckle. Colin blushed in embarrassment as he buckled his seatbelt. Was it loud? He asked. Eliza shook her head no. I needed a nap. I have been up for almost 24 hours. He confessed. Eliza's smile dropped a bit. I am sorry. She felt like it was her fault, but Colin quickly corrected her. Don't be. It isn't the first time. The plane landed and the two unboarded the flight quickly. They were expecting to catch the next flight to the UK shortly after, but the flight was put on delay due to an unknown circumstance. Colin inquired about when they could take the next flight to England, but the attendant informed him they had no idea when the flights out of the US were being shut down for some reason. Colin didn't argue. Without a word, he quickly led Eliza to the baggage claim to pick up their stuff. I think this has to do with the new laws in effect. No doubt they are reaching the UK. Colin took his phone out of his pocket and turned the airplane mode off. Kitty had texted him a few times, along with news articles about the UK and Americans shutting down flights out of the country. From what the article stated, they wanted to do a better job at security, with the supernaturals becoming registered as citizens and the judges and hunters being flagged. Much of the governments and travel agencies were shutting down to set a procedure in place. This was not good for the two of them. Colin needed to find a way out of the country and back home. Eliza stood beside him waiting for her suitcase to travel down the belt. Colin sighed and put his phone away. He didn't want to alarm Eliza any more than she needed to, so he would only tell her a basic truth. We need to find another way out of the country. Things are heating up. Eliza, things might get heated, but I need you to stay calm and do everything I tell you, and exactly how I tell you, understand? Colin looked Eliza dead in her eyes to make sure she understood. Eliza nodded, signaling to him. She understood how important it was to listen. She did her best to remain calm, but in the back of her mind, anxious thoughts flooded in. Colin waited till they were outside before calling his wife back. He wanted to get away from anyone who would hear him and raise an alarm. Kitty was calm as she spoke to him. She suggested he get help from his brother who operated in New York, but Colin brushed it off. If it was a last resort, then he would, but he wanted to try and figure this out on his own. Colin had no idea where the hunters and judges in this area had relocated. No doubt they went underground, but he had no idea where. The Cowden hunters chasers never planned for anything like this, so everyone just did as they thought best. Let's go and get a room. There's a safe hotel and spa here. Eric's daughter Danielle owns it. He explained as he flagged down a taxi. Danielle had recently opened up a hotel in New York, after her main branch in Chicago took off and became well known. The female dragon decided to expand, and the Big Apple was the best choice. Oris Hotel Spa, New York. Colin and Eliza entered the hotel and checked in with no problem. The place was teeming with other supernaturals as well as humans. Colin and Eliza made their way to their room quickly. Once inside, Eliza sat her bag on one of the twin beds and took a seat in the chair. Let me go and take a shower, then we can head back down to the restaurant in the hotel, Colin said as he sat his bag on the other twin bed. He unzipped it and retrieved a set of clean clothes before heading to the bathroom. While Eliza waited, she decided to jot a few things down in her diary. She recorded not only the known information she was given by Colin about who she was and her father, but on her feelings about everything. It was a mixture of fear, excitement, and relief. The relief she finally had answers. Excitement because her boring life was no longer boring, and fear because of the fact they, the judges, were on the run. 30 minutes passed quickly, and Colin had to touch Eliza on the shoulder. She was so focused on her writing she didn't even notice he was ready to head back downstairs. Do we get paid for being a judge? Eliza asked as she put her book away. Most times, yes. But don't worry about anything. Our family is quite wealthy. You are family now, so that money belongs to you. Your father's portion is now your own. Colin explained. Okay, I was worried and felt bad. I have no money to pay you back for all this. She stood up and placed her journal back in her book sack. No need to worry, Liza. Colin gave her a reassuring smile and turned to exit the room. Once in the restaurant, the two judges were sitting in the back, away from prying eyes. The fairy-like creature handed them menus with a smile and excused herself. Eliza opened the menu up and started to read over it. Blood, raw mic, they cater to all creatures here. Were our waiters supernatural? She asked. Colin was surprised. This is the most Eliza had talked about this whole time. He was glad, it meant she was warming up to him. Colin kept a smile on his face as he began to answer all her questions. Yes, this place serves all types of creatures. Danielle is all about inclusiveness. The waitress looked like a half-breed fairy. Fairies are normally tiny, but a few use magic to make themselves bigger and mate with humans. Colin explained. Eliza's eyes scanned the bar. It finally settled on a regal-looking man. He was ash-white with pitch-black hair. His eyes were dark and he was supernaturally handsome. He wore what looked like medieval-style robes and a black crown on his head. The man caught Eliza watching him and gave her a smirk. Eliza quickly covered her face with a menu. Colin was about to ask her why she was hiding under her menu, but a large Filipino male approached the table. "Jameson." "Colin?" he asked, looking down at Colin. The male had large muscles as if he was a bodybuilder, and the way he stood there was intimidating. Colin, however, was not moved by his presence. "Yes, I am he." He lifted a brow. The man slowly smiled and held out his hand. "Judge Mason." He spoke in a low tone. "I worked with you and Frederick way back in the day. You probably don't remember me. I was a bit smaller then." Colin took the man's hand and shook it firmly. "I think I do remember you." Colin looked around to make sure no one heard Mason tell him he was a judge. "Have a seat, join us," Colin insisted. Mason took a seat near Eliza and smiled. "How are things here with the whole Shophetim being outlaws?" Colin spoke in a low tone. "It has been rough. Most of us have gone underground. Some have sought sanctuary here in this hotel," Mason explained. He then turned to Eliza and held out his hand. "Eliza." She gave him her name and her hand. Mason shook it gently and let it go before turning back to face Colin. "Eliza, this is my cousin and a fellow judge. She is new, and I was trying to get her back to my home in England." Colin explained. "Yeah, I heard they shut down all flights. I am not sure about boats yet, but I am sure that is next. You are safe here. Danny has a strict no fighting or hunting policy," Mason explained. "Yes, but we cannot stay here forever," Colin added. "I am sorry you have to be trained under the current circumstances. It is going to be double hard for you to miss." Mason frowns at Eliza, giving her his sympathy. Eliza glanced down at the table a bit upset before her gaze moved to the bar. The regal-looking male was still looking at her. Her face turned red as she averted her eyes once more. Mason stopped talking when he noticed Eliza turning red. "What is wrong?" Colin asked. "That man over there, he is looking at me." She spoke softly, trying to avoid his gaze. Colin and Mason both turned to try and find who was gawking at her. "Who?" Colin asked again. "The guy over there, all in black with pale skin." She shifted nervously in her seat. The regal man stood up and almost floated to the other side of the restaurant. Colin and Mason watched him walk to a table on the other side and sit down. "Oh, him. That is the Nightmare King, Otto." Mason shook his head. "Nightmare King?" Colin raised a brow. He had never heard of such a thing. "Yeah. In the Dark Ages, he was king over some land in England. He turned to dark magic to save his country, but ended up turning mad. He used nightmares and dreams, hoping to scare his enemies. One day the rival kings banded together and banished him into a portal. I heard he was released back in Vietnam. Since then he has been sort of keeping a low profile." Mason explains. "So he once was human?" Eliza asked. "Yes. What is he now? And why?" she asked, using her peripheral vision to look at him. "Most humans and ever some supernatural beings can turn when using magic, especially dark magic. He may have once been human, but I doubt it now," Colin explained. Mason and Colin continued to talk about the old days as well as the current situation. Eliza tried to pay attention, but for some reason, she was drawn to the handsome dark stranger. It was as if she had seen him once before. Eliza was only snapped out of her thoughts when the waitress came back. "I will have the steak, rare. And whatever she and he is having, put it on my bill." Colin smiled over at Mason. "Oh, you don't have to." "No, I insisted." Colin patted the big guy on the back. The fairy wrote down their order and looked over at Eliza. "And you, hun?" she asked. Eliza was not prepared. She frantically looked over the menu and blurted out the first thing she saw that looked decent. The salmon. Eliza then handed the menu back and took a long sip of her water. Colin lifted a brow as he watched her. He may have just met her, but she was acting a bit strange. Anyways, so Mason, you said judges and hunters are banding together underground. Colin turned to Mason to continue his conversion. Chapter 8, Rio, Brazil. Once the Black Files division was shut down in Austin over a few months ago, the agents all scattered throughout the country. Samar and Joe fled deep into the backwoods of Texas. Michael did his best